Thank you for joining today's web briefing. My name is Michael Hiskey. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Data Connectors, and we're delighted to have you here for this unique type of webinar we call a Data Connectors Cyber Connect web briefing. We've invited members of our 650,000 member community across North America to listen to a very unique CISO panel that'll actually be introduced with some really interesting research from 451 researchers Fernando Montenegro. Now, we've worked with 451 a long time, and the research that they have today on public cloud is really pertinent to everyone. Now, after we hear from Fernando, we'll go through a CISO panel. So we have 4 great CISOs and executives that are talking every day about public cloud security and how to do that well. We'll have a bit of a discussion. We'll go through 6 different points. As that discussion draws to a close, we'll hear a little bit more from Patrick Pusher from Orca Security, who will tell us both about some primary research the Orca team has done on virtual appliances that'll really surprise you, as Dawn alluded to in the lobby. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our feature speaker and host, Fernando Montenegro. Fernando, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing safe and well. Thank you very much for taking the time. Well, we're going to go through some data-driven insights early on, and then, as Michael alluded to, we'll have a panel conversation in a little bit. At this point in time, just a brief mention of the names for our session today. So I'll be leading some of the initial research conversation, and then we'll have Drew, Avi, Sachin, and Dimitri on a back and forth panel conversation on cloud topics that will also be data driven. So without further ado, let me get started. What I want to look at today is I want to introduce the point about, or the journey that people are going through in the context of cloud security. But we want to do that, first of all, grounding it into what is the rest of the enterprise doing, right? And so we'll go from some context for that transformation. Then we'll go into some of the adoption patterns we've seen, and then the impact on security, followed by the panel conversation. One of the things I always like to call out is when you come to these events, and again, thank you for taking the time to join us. When you come to these events, me as an industry analyst, 451 Research, we're now part of S&P Global, we cover a wide spectrum of areas. And I believe that the best contribution that we can make as analysts in this conversation is to help you as the audience understand where you are in your own individual journeys. Now, you all understand the kind of challenges you're facing individually, but what does that look like over the broad term? So I really like to bring more industry perspective into how we do into what we're seeing, and I think it's important to call out where that perspective is coming from. So there's 2 pillars to our research. On one hand, we have the briefings, inquiries, and research. That's the daily interactions we have with multiple stakeholders, hundreds of hours, as it says there. We'll talk to enterprise IT stakeholders. We'll talk to service providers. We'll talk to vendors. 451 Research, we talk a lot with people in the investment community, and that's a little bit more of a qualitative bent. The other side of the conversation is our 451 Voice of the Enterprise survey program. Some of you in the audience may actually be part of that, so for that, thank you. And that is a regular survey program where we ask insights on different topics over the year. So on one quarter, we may ask questions about budgets. On another quarter, we may ask questions about what kind of workloads are happening in organizations, how the organization is evolving, and so on. We also use some surveys that are more topic specific. Specifically, I like to use some of the Devops work. And this being 2020, we have done some significant work around COVID, which I think is relevant for this conversation as well. So a little bit more of a data-driven bent on some of the survey work. So with that in mind, let's let's touch base first on what we're seeing in the context of what COVID-19 has done to us, but then center more around digital transformation and security. This is so we've polled people throughout the year, and what I think is interesting here is we asked them that what is happening, how has it affected you, and it was interesting to see that when we ask practitioners across the industry, it's not just security practitioners. When we ask practitioners across the industry, as you can see on the slide, information security came up as one of the topics where we have either seen increased efforts or accelerated initial efforts, just behind the entire digital customer experience. So I think this is an indication that, yes, we have paid a lot more attention to security. I would argue that, and this is a conversation we can have, but I would argue that some of the, especially the cloud-centric kind of work, that continues unabated, right? So it's an interesting point that, yes, we are all dealing with COVID and the consequences, but from a security perspective, we're all working very hard, and the work keeps moving on. Now, so that's what I had that I wanted to comment on in the topic of COVID. I want to take a bigger view of things, and the point that we are making is IT overall has been on this journey of digital transformation, and the data points that we have. This is asking general IT practitioners. It's not asking security professionals specifically. About 90% of them indicate that digital transformation is real for them, right? And we can debate what that means, but in essence, what we're seeing is that nearly half of respondents across the world are indicating that they are executing digital transformation strategies, and a significant number of them are either in the planning stages to start this or evaluating. The fact of the matter is that there's significant focus now on how to transform businesses leveraging IT, right? And that's going to be significant because it drives a lot of the interest in cloud and cloud security. The other thing I want to call out is that approximately 60% of respondents indicate that they see this transition, having IT have a more strategic role. And this is going to come back a little bit, because when we talk about things being more strategic, we have a much deeper need for communication and understanding what's happening across the organization. So that's on that's what we see happening on this type of transformation. That being said, we ask again general IT practitioners, what kind of skills are you seeing shortages on that are going to potentially hamper this? And I found it interesting that the 2020 numbers indicate cloud platform expertise. It's a key area of concern. Cloud native functionality, and then security, right? So even more than some of the more business related areas. So I thought that this is really interesting, because it points to people are concerned with how we're going to understand the environments that we're rolling out, and more than that, how are we going to secure those environments? And it's a perennial answer on what kind of things hold back some of these initiatives. Security comes as a key topic most of the time. Now, with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the what does this cloud transformation is kind of looking like for organizations. This is an interesting data point, and what we asked here is, this is something we'll ask throughout the years. So we asked practitioners in 2020, where does the majority of your workload currently reside? So the way to interpret this chart is that, for example, 38% of respondents indicated the majority of their workloads are running traditional on-premises IT. And then we ask them, okay, project 2 years out into the future, 2022, where do you expect the majority of your workloads is going to reside? Well, only 15% of people responded that it's going to be traditional on-premises IT. So what we're seeing here is that people are indicating this massive shift towards different forms of compute. I find it interesting that a number of people indicate SaaS as the top destination. So there is this demand to focus on what your company does, kind of thing. But IaaS, and this should include platform as a service too, this kind of infrastructure work also saw a significant growth. So we are expecting that this trend is going to continue. Now, what does that look like? It doesn't mean necessarily that we're all automatically transitioning everything to cloud. When we ask practitioners about modernization, okay, so you have a mission critical workload in your organization that you are going to modernize. What does that modernization look like? I'd argue that up until a couple of years ago, there was a significant focus on lift and shift. You know what? Let's just take the workloads that we have. Let's put them on virtual machines, exactly same type of architecture, move them up to the cloud. And so when we asked people in 2019, about 17% of respondents indicated that was their strategy. Interestingly, that number fell down to 10% in 2020. What this means is that the idea of that what teams are looking at now is, okay, how are we going to do things? It doesn't have to be necessarily let's just lift and shift things one way over to the cloud. It was interesting that the two areas that saw growth were two different approaches, right? On one hand, you have a number of people who indicate, you know what, for the mission critical legacy workloads, we're modernizing on premises, and here we start to see shades of interest in hybrid cloud. And the other is, you know what, yes, we're going to move to cloud, we're going to refactor, and we're going to move to cloud. So I think that regardless, even if for the workloads that are going to be still a little bit more on premises, the notion of cloud delivery patterns and how we do Devops and those things will become much more of a factor. Now, that is at the more conceptual level, thinking a little bit more about the role that the public cloud providers themselves are going to play. It's interesting to see that the top three cloud providers, they account for a significant proportion of where workloads are residing. The one thing that I think is interesting here is that, first of all, both Amazon Web Services and Microsoft share significant proportion of respondents. Microsoft has a very strong presence for those that have more of a SaaS bent with Office 365 and kind of leading the way into this, and Amazon a little bit more on how we are going to build for those that are building components, maybe smaller firms, but also, I mean, both of them, of course, have significant presence in both large and smaller enterprises. But the fact is, we're going to see more of a multi-cloud world. One of the things that I find interesting is that, and this is a discussion we can have later, around organizations themselves may be multi-cloud, individual projects not so much. So this is going to come back to us in the context of security conversations significantly, because there is this transition for security teams that were more centralized, moving on into other areas. But let's talk a little bit about the impact on security. One of the questions that we often ask, and now we're shifting to more security practitioners. One of the questions that we often ask is, what's your top security pain point, right? And invariably, user behavior comes as the top choice. So this is like we'll ask on a quarterly basis. This early 2020 was the first time where cloud security came up this high. So there's this increasing concern about cloud security from IT practitioners, and the question that we keep thinking is, okay, are we somehow able to contain this? Like if we are more risk averse, are we going to be able to restrict some of this deployments a little bit? And the answer that I have is no. Here, again, same similar time frame, we asked practitioners, sorry, we asked practitioners what is their approach to towards using cloud, primarily IaaS and PaaS. And as you can see the numbers here, 40% of respondents indicate that they can see hosted cloud solutions using for everything, including high-risk mission-critical applications. There's still 33% that say that they still want to focus on smaller, but one of the things I want to call out is that as we track these numbers over the years, 40% for hosted clouds have been the highest we've seen so far. Quoting from memory here, I believe that in 2019, that was 37%. In 2018, that was 35%. So we're definitely seeing that shift. The message here is that you should not be expecting to be able to hold that off as a defense strategy. The other, which leads to an interesting question: how are you going to manage this? And this was another interesting data point. We asked practitioners, how are you going to find out that if something happened on your cloud presence, how are you going to find out? And a proportion of the 48% of people now indicate that they are doing this, they are going to find out because their own security monitoring tells them. And I find that data point very heartening. That number was not that high before. And still a large number of people think that their cloud provider is going to be able to tell them. And that leads to an interesting conversation on shared responsibility models we'll talk about in a second. One data point I want to call out here is that the data that we have, when we do split it up between respondents and we correlate the response to this question with how much experience people have had on cloud, the number of people who have been there longer respond proportionally higher that it's their responsibility, which again I find it's an interesting conclusion. So let's talk shared responsibility models for a second. I'm a big fan of the conceptual model delineating what is the provider responsibility versus what is the client's. And but when we look at the models from most of the cloud providers, they are usually a little bit more tactical. So we put this together just to illustrate that from our perspective, the layer that's always the provider is like up to the virtualization layer, and that's fine. And yes, I'm making an exception for if you're using bare metal on your instances and so on, fine. There is that segregation that changes between what happens if you're doing IaaS versus PaaS versus SaaS. But I want to call out the top part, and that does not change. And that's a conversation I've had with many practitioners who say, "Oh no, yeah, no, I'm using IAM or I'm whatever my provider is offering." That's fine. That's a service that you're using on that cloud. That doesn't mean that they are doing it for you, right? So I think that overall accountability for security remains with the customer throughout. I think that's a point that needs to be called out, and that flows down into how you do identities. That flows into how you do data architecture and governance, and that flows into how you do security governance, security monitoring and response. I think it's an interesting point as well. With that in mind, thank you for the time so far. We are now passing over to I think Michael's going to help us go through moderate our panel discussion. Michael.
Outstanding. Yes, it is time for our panel discussion. So I'll ask my panelists to go ahead and start their video again. And I will switch to the gallery view. You should see everybody on the screen now. Our panel is going to be an interesting discussion. So Fernando has several great data points that he's going to share with us, and he'll talk us through those individual data points after a fashion, and then each panelist will have the chance to sort of talk through their thoughts on those data points. So I'm going to share again Fernando's slide. There, our panelists today are a great group of folks. I'll let them introduce themselves each individually in a moment, but we have Drew Daniels, Avi Shua from Orca Security, Sachin Jain from EvaluServe, and Dmitry Sokolovsky from Ovid. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share for a second so we can see everybody's beautiful faces, and let's get started with Drew. Please give us a 1-minute overview about yourself.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. I'm Drew Daniels. I am the CIO and CISO for Druva Incorporated. Druva is a cloud-first, cloud-native data protection and enterprise backup solution. And I've got about 22 years in the industry, and I've been leading information security and information technology for the last 15 or 16 years.
Outstanding. Avi.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Avi Shua. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Orca Security. I myself have been in cyber since I was 13 years old. As a teenager, then a decade in the Israeli intelligence in the cyber offensive unit, then a decade in Checkpoint, last 4 years as the chief technologist, and co-founded with additional 7 co-founders of Orca Security 2 years ago. Our mission is to build the cloud security network. Using our side scanning technology, we're able to provide deep workload assessment in context with no agents or scanners.
Outstanding. Sachin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sachin Jain, and I'm the global CIO and CISO for EvaluServe. In addition to my focus on IT and information security, I also help our analytics team in managing data engineering. So that's where I can also share some inputs during the panel. And I've been with EvaluServe for almost 20 years. And overall, I have over 24 years of experience in the industry.
Outstanding. Last but not least, Dmitry.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Fernando. My name is Dmitry Sokolovsky. I am a CISO and very, very recently a CSO at Avid Technology. Avid has been developing, marketing, selling, and supporting software integrated solutions for video and audio content creation for the entertainment industry for about the last 30 years. Our clients range from millions of individual creators to largest media corporations, and they use Avid solutions to create movies, songs, television shows, live concerts, sporting events, even news broadcasts. I'm proud to say that Avid has been honored for technological innovation with 18 Emmy Awards, 1 Grammy, 2 Oscars, and even America's Cinema Editors Technical Excellence Award. We even join a very short list of recipients, such as like NASA and Panavision, as a recipient of prestigious File of Farnsworth Award by the Television Academy. I started my career in '98, a long time ago. I worked in all areas of IT, including 11 years in an information security vendor where I participated in incident response and remediation, some of the largest breaches in US history, and later worked as a cloud security architect. I'm also a member of a number of advisory boards for InfoSec startups and venture capital firms, and a member of SENS faculty.
Outstanding. What a great background. Fernando, to bring the conversation over to you, you should be able to see my screen now. Let's go ahead with the first data point and start the discussion.
Yes, so the format we're going to follow here is that I'll present an extra data point, so we have a few of them, and then that is going to inform the question for the panel. So this is an interesting data point we ask of security practitioners. What areas do you consider that you have a gap in your teams in terms of skill sets? And if you click the next, Michael, one of the things that you'll see is that cloud platform expertise comes up as the top choice 2 years in a row now, leading us to an interesting point of if there's that much cloud if there's that much cloud deployments going on, and there's that much concern from security teams around how they are doing, how they have cloud expertise, that prompts up the very first question, Michael, if you don't mind. So the question for the panel: how are you handling the demand within your security organizations for cloud expertise? And I'll add one thing here, that it's interesting that all of us in the panel have been at this for a while. So we've witnessed kind of this transformation of cloud. So I'm particularly curious, gentlemen, how are you handling the within your teams, the demand for cloud expertise?
Drew, why don't you start us off?
Sure. It is a real thing, Fernando. As I try and hire on my team, and we hire at Druva, because we're cloud native, we really depend on that skill set and that expertise in the cloud. And I see a number of candidates not be able to pass the technical and screenings that we do. The way I handle it is couple-fold. First and foremost, I have to leverage, and it's especially relevant as CIO and CISO, I have to leverage other parts of my organization. So I have a great dependence on DevOps and Cloud Ops and our SREs. I transfer some of that security workload, managing those resources, into that team. But the key there is, as I transfer those things to those teams, I have to make sure that while I trust them to do that, I have to verify that they're continuing to do that. But I think the other thing that we are doing internally is we encourage and even pay for and even promote our employees to go after some of the cloud certifications that make a lot of sense, so that we can help. While we may not have somebody as an expert in all of the areas we need, we can help them develop and grow in those areas.
Interesting. Dimitri, what would you add to that?
I would say that finding cloud expertise is time-consuming, very time-consuming, difficult to get right, and ultimately too expensive. Trying to find the people that have all this experience, it's going to be expensive. What I fall back to is that underlying principles of information security are pretty much the same. The hygiene, the basics are all the same across on-prem deployments as well as the cloud. So instead of looking for specific dedicated cloud knowledge, I look for good InfoSec IT professionals, or even people from unrelated fields like lawyers, poets, and musicians. I've hired those as well. And then, to Drew's point, trained them, mentored them, and with clear mind, with mental agility, they can pick this up pretty quickly. And when we work together as a team, we can cover up for the inexperience where they do majority of the work.
Avi, poets and magicians sounds like your area as a startup founder, but how are your clients finding the right expertise when they need to get people that understand kind of DevSecOps in the cloud and these sorts of things?
So what we are hearing from our customers is definitely that they have lack of personnel. And in fact, I don't think it's that different from the case that we have for decades, where essentially we always add too little people that understand in enough depth the problems. And I see it from the viewpoint of a vendor. Where we are hearing for our customers, please reduce the amount of plumbing work. We want our people to focus only on the things that they have to do. Take out the plumbing, don't show thousands of alerts that are irrelevant, make sure that it's prioritized, because you will always be in a world that you have too little people. So you need the machine to do as much as possible to reduce the amount left for the human beings. There's no other way.
Yeah. So Sachin, there's a global sort of shortage of cybersecurity skills, and particularly cloud cybersecurity. What are you doing at Evaluaserve to find the right expertise?
Yeah, one thing what we have seen is that at the speed the cloud has taken off, the shortage of the domain expertise. Basically, what we saw on Fernando's slide also, the platform expertise, and people they're doing more of a lift and shift. And second piece, which was very important around the cybersecurity, and cloud security was something which was not getting aligned and at the speed of of all the security controls, and maybe the solutions were not keeping pace with the way the cloud was getting adopted across enterprises. One thing what we are seeing is, as Dimitri rightly mentioned, we are obviously using those underlying principles to look at how do we define a security framework which works in both on-premise and on cloud, and it gives you a perfect hybrid cloud security shape. And then on top of that, we are also going through certain certifications and certain standards which can give us enough security for all the workloads we are moving to the cloud. And that is something which gives you more confidence to adopt cloud faster.
Fascinating. So Fernando, the next data point's on cloud usage. You should see it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So the question I had here is, this is interesting because all of you are experienced security executives and you've seen this transformation. And it seems that a lot of you have shifted towards enabling people and in some cases shifting responsibilities. What's interesting though is that it in most cases it kind of still stops with you. And so when we ask security practitioners what it is that concerns you about cloud, right? We gave them several options, and interestingly enough, the top three choices were so loss of control over sensitive data, yeah, auditability, and compliance-related issues. Why I think this is relevant? Well, on one hand, loss of control over sensitive data means that it's related to the fact that as those engineering teams are out doing their things, they're spinning up QA VPCs. They are using performance testing somewhere. Like, what's happening with the actual sensitive data that the organization has, right? That has been reported by security practitioners as a key concern. Then the auditability part, that's the flip side of that. Not only how they are handling the data that the organization entrusts them with, how are they, how can I as a security organization make sure that whatever controls have been put in place have been configured the right way, particularly if somebody else is doing them. And then the final point I find interesting, I particularly like compliance issues. Kind of weird, I know. But I think that it's interesting compliance comes up to the top three, because compliance in this case relates to how do I, as a security organization, now prove to the others, to the outside world, that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So with that in mind, I'd like to move on to the second question to everyone here. We saw what the general data was. Does that line up with what you see? I mean, what kind of concerns your organizations most as you're going on your cloud services adoption journey?
The exciting life of an analyst. He enjoys talking about compliance.
Oh man, don't get me started.
Let's turn it around a little bit, and Sachin, start with you, sir.
Yeah, no, I agree with all the thoughts Fernando has shared. In fact, I agree with all the findings, not just top three Fernando shared. And it's very, very important. And I think security, as we see, has become one of the key concerns when people think of cloud. And I've seen in various discussions with other CXOs and with some of our clients, and the way they look at adoption of cloud tells you that how security is still playing big in everybody's mind when they have to talk about, for example, data localization and compliances. And we are talking to some of the clients even right now where it is becoming very, very painful because they've gone through that legacy framework for years. And that control, what Fernando has shared, I think plays very big psychologically in everybody's mind, because they have a fear that they will not have enough control and policies applied to the data. But I think the way things are moving and the kind of confidence we are getting, the number Fernando showed initially, I think that is going to change. Maybe sooner, not maybe by 2022, but maybe sooner.
Now, Drew, your organization is very cloud native, born on the cloud, doing lots of this. So do you view this differently than some?
I do a little bit. I mean, you know, the interesting thing about Druva is it actually started as an on-prem organization. You know, it's a much older company than I think a lot of people realize. Been going on for 12 years now, 12 plus years. So I do view it a little differently. I think that from my perspective, I'm all in on cloud, and I've been all in on cloud for some time in my own career. There's just a lot of benefits for that. But something Fernando said in his presentation, which I think is important to highlight, is that shared responsibility model. These questions that popped up at the top are really important for the end users and the consumers of the cloud to really be responsible for accounting and holding their vendors accountable for those things. One of the things that we've been doing at Druva, and we announced some of these things this week, is we're focused on, the additive services. Fernando mentioned compliance. I mean, auditing and proactive compliance, that's something that's very important to us, that we provide to our customers so that they can know that. But, I did a webinar for my own company a couple days ago, and one of the things that I kind of pointed out really importantly was, going back to that shared responsibility model, we provide you the tools and the capabilities, but you still have to test it. You still have to make sure it works the way it should work. And I encourage, I have, some advisory CISOs who are customers of ours, who I go and ask on a regular basis, what are their thoughts about this, about the capabilities that we're providing, so that I can get a sense for how can we do it better, differently, stronger, so that we can support them.
Avi, I want to move the conversation over to you, though. We talked about the three top things: loss of control of sensitive data, auditability, compliance-related issues. How do you, and the clients you speak to, how do you rank those? Do those always come up to the top? Is there something else you'd add?
They are always on the top. I can't say that I'm surprised out of these numbers, but I think that many times people confuse the cloud culture from the cloud technology. I think the cloud culture, the expectation that everything will be out in the next week, in the next day, creates a pressure to work in a way which doesn't favor security. Let's put it that way. But in fact, the cloud allows dramatically better auditability and compliance certification than on-prem. Yeah. If you think about that, let's say that someone would put a machine in an on-prem data center without talking to anyone, without talking to IT. You would never be able to probe it. No way. In the cloud, you can without doing anything, just from the infrastructure level. So the cloud providers enables a dramatically better level of auditability, and we just take to we hold them accountable for the cloud culture that they enabled.
Yeah, and I think that's often overlooked. Now, Dimitri, you and I have spoken in the past. Ovid moved quickly amid the COVID crisis to enable all your people to work from home. You couldn't do that without relying on a lot of cloud-based data, right?
Yeah, and echoing what Ovid just mentioned, I wouldn't call it culture. I would call it an emergency, cloud emergency. It's not cloud culture. But that's one of the leading problems. It's the severely shrunken timelines leading to lack of understanding of the capabilities of the cloud, lack of understanding of the fine print, responsibility ownership, back to the responsibility model, and lack of dedicated re-architecture efforts. We just lift and shift, and that's not what cloud was designed for. That's not the idea. And we combine that with myriad of possible and default configurations that do live in the cloud already. That's where, that's the world we step into. We lose both understanding and of the reality and visibility, and ability to fix things quickly. But it's effort. Once we understand that, the G.I. Joe thing, it's now you know, so let's go and fix it. Now we're back again to the basics and the hygiene and just getting stuff done.
And knowing is half the battle. Fernando, I want to hear your data point. I also want to hear your opinion on DevOps versus DevSecOps.
Oh, okay, perfect. Way to set me up here. So this is an interesting data point. This is where we asked DevOps practitioners, not security. So we asked DevOps practitioners, how are they doing DevOps inside their organizations? And when I first came across this data point in our research, it this one blows me away, kind of scares me a little bit, in the sense that 49% of people indicate that the processes are being run independently on the business units. And central IT is aware of them. Why is this a problem? Well, because up until now, security teams have been more centralized, and they've been doing, it was easier, in a sense, to just go out and talk to IT. Well, tie that with the thing I mentioned earlier about IT becoming more strategic, involving more people, and so on and so forth. Now security teams have to reach out into a much broader proportion of the organization to be able to understand how that's being done. I mean, typically cloud engineering teams, for example. Now, you asked about DevOps versus Devsecops. I'm not a big fan of the term Devsecops, but I come from someone in my family is a physician, and I have a deep respect for you engage people with the way that they understand it. If getting security teams to work better with DevOps teams and DevOps teams to work better with security teams, if I have to use the expression DevSecOps to use that, I'll take a deep breath, but I'll use it. So my question to the practitioners here, you all have, and Drew, you mentioned this as some of this delegation. Tell us more. How do you work alongside? How do you get this collaboration with other in the teams?
So I think it's a couple-fold. So, as I mentioned when I said that point, and Fernando, I'm with you. I mean, I heard this a couple of years ago, DevSecOps, and I'm like, what the heck does that mean? I've got security practitioners, I got DevOps, and they do work collaboratively together. But the primary focus that I do with that is, the cloud helps you democratize, access to things. So you have to deal with that fragmentation of that classical or IT-centric model. Businesses are going to own some of these capabilities, and you have to deal with that if you're going to be dealing with the cloud, because it's just the way that the economy and the cloud is scaling up and growing and maturing. So the big thing that I do is, and I had to train my teams on this because they weren't doing this at first, is as we transfer controls, going back to compliance, or as we transfer functionality to other teams like DevOps and even BizOps, then we have to come back and we have to verify that. We have to do random sampling. We have to make sure that the teams are doing what we expect them to do. And, going back to that shared responsibility model, one of the things that I also do is when I'm doing my incident testing and my DR, I'm also throwing those scenarios into the work. So, getting those teams involved, helping them to be a part of the greater security. I mean, I'm sure that the other panelists that are CISOs here have thought this, have tried to do this, where, I tell the whole company that everyone is virtually part of the security team, because I need every single one of them to help me do my job.
Yeah. So Dimitri, you're a CISO. Where does the cloud engineering team report up to in Ovid?
Right now, it's still the product side, but now that I'm also a CSO, maybe we can start working together. And the question was, how do we work alongside the engineering teams? And I always say carefully, like all engineers, they secretly want you to be interested. They want to tell you what they're doing. So the first thing that I found that we definitely need to do is understand what they do, understand their process, understand their pain points, and most importantly, resource management approach, because it's going to tie into the day-to-day flow. And then we work with them, we educate them, we tell them stories. It's a lot of storytelling, like a lot of CISO and CSO work. It's a lot of storytelling. And if we do those two things correctly, we understand what and why they do, and then we teach them. Everything turns on a dime, and they pull you into everything. Maybe too much now, and they pull you into everything they're doing. And they want to know your opinion. They want to know what you have to say, because now you are part of their team. And when you become part of their team, we're halfway there.
Storytelling and some psychology, isn't it? I'm sorry, Drew, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have something to add to that. I mean, Dimitri said something that I think is very, very important, which is, you know, our jobs as CISOs, as security practitioners, you know, I've had a CEO more than once call me the king of analogies, because my job is to do narration and storytelling, because, you know, sometimes it gets lost on them how challenging this can be, especially in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, Sachin, is that different? You're the CIO and CISO at a value serve. So do you look at this question of how you work alongside your cloud engineering team differently?
No, I completely agree with what Drew mentioned, and security is not just the responsibility of the CISO function. Security is the shared responsibility within the organization, and that's what we promote within our organization, where we have almost 4,000 folks globally. And right on the day one during the orientation, we tell everyone that InfoSec is the responsibility of each and every individual, and they are equally participating in it. And I'll also take the cue from what Avi said. It's the culture what you create, and it's the cloud culture what you need to create. And when people start thinking that data is not just within your data center, but data is in the cloud, and data can be everywhere. And with people working remotely, even the data can be accessed from anywhere and everywhere on all the devices. And how do you look at the security? How do you inculcate that culture with what people give the importance? I think it's very, very important. And even with the cloud engineering team, the kind of foundational layers they need to use, the kind of frameworks they need to follow, I think these are things which are very, very important for both internal functions as well as for all the client projects we deliver using
Avi,
cloud.
what would you add?
So I think the authors have left the stables, and it's clear that, as everyone said, this is democratized. The dev teams are going to make changes, and they are not going to ask security for any change. And I think that one thing that will never change, as in democracy, is that you need someone to audit. You need someone to see that people are not doing things that they are not supposed, and you can't rely on them to audit themselves. This needs to be a separate team that have the tools and ability to audit what's actually happening, preferably without needing the help of the auditees, without interfering the auditees while they're being audited.
Yeah, Fernando, that sets up your next point nicely, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I love that you're all working towards setting up people for success. And the way to interpret this chart is I want to bring a positive note. So a couple of things. The way to look at this, if you look at the green and the blue distribution, you see that they are different. And you see that the green distribution shifts a lot more to that 100% there. What does that mean? Well, here we ask DevOps practitioners what percentage of their workloads deploy security? Well, the interesting thing here is that out of the total pool of respondents, you can see that the distribution is kind of flat. But when we factor in the people who have been doing DevOps for longer, right? So the people who have more experience, the proportion of people who indicate they have deployed more security is increases. Now, the statistician in me here, the budding statistician in me here would be remiss if I don't point out that an N of 25 is not really high. So let's take this more anecdotally. But the point is there. The point being that as you do more, as you practice more, you become better at something. And in this case, it's including security within DevOps. So with that in mind, I'm really curious to see from our panelists, what have you learned along your journey that you can help someone along the way? That like, what interesting learnings do you want to share with us?
Avi, let's start with you this time.
I think the most important thing that I, with my customer, learned is that the cloud is dramatically and materially different than on-prem, and we need to look at it differently. Like lifting and shifting failed us when we tried to lift and shift the IT, we reached a dramatically inferior solution. Then lifting and shifting the way we used to do security will result in the same. We need to look at it as a completely different thing.
Drew, I feel like you have a lot of interesting learnings to share. Give us a couple.
Yeah, I think Avi said it too, and I think this is very important. And I've said it a couple times. is you can trust, kind of the Ronald Reagan era theory. You can trust, but you've got to verify. That observability is very important. So making sure that, and something else that Avi said that I really, really liked is, and I think this is very important, if you're getting in the way of your end users, two things are going to happen. One, they're going to avoid you. They're going to try and work around you. They're going to try and do things in secret because they see you as an obstruction that prevents them from doing their jobs. And two, you're not going to get their participation and you're not going to know what's going on. And we just can't do our jobs without that. And I would go back that, test, test, test. Even if you're doing observability and even if, you're doing sampling and proactive compliance, you also need to have scenarios where you throw curveballs at the team and you see how the team responds. And that's not meant to trip them up. I'm not trying to catch you or prevent you from doing something. I'm trying to help you grow. And I think Dimitri said this, mentorship. When those things don't go as well as they should, you have those after learnings and you say, here's what we learned from that. Here's the things that we're not doing well at. Let's spend some time to practice on that.
A lot to unpack there. Trust but verify, test, 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 building on the audit point. Sachin, what would you add, one or two learnings that you have?
I completely agree with whatever has been said by Avi and Drew. And these are some important things, what we also keep emphasizing on, that they need to involve security teams right upfront. I mean, they should enable the business and they should see security more as enabler rather than somebody who's putting roadblocks. And that's what we have been able to create at Evaluserve, where the culture is where we work collaboratively and security gets involved at quite early stage when we work on some of the client projects.
Dimitri, give us one thing no one else has said yet.
How close implementing security is to being a parent. When you tell participants the right story and you make them part of the solution, they love to do it. And when we concentrate on showing people that they are security champions for what they do, once we describe to them and explain why something is or isn't happening, it's incredible how much participation you get and how infectious it becomes.
One of my friends is a COO, and he always says that it's like being the parent of a teenager. They want my money, but not my advice. Fernando, on that happy note, what is the next data point you have for us?
I'm still recovering from that as the parent of a teenager who is exactly like that. So anyway, picking up on that parenting thing for a second, that teenager, they are out in the world going to try different things, and it's up to us as parents to help them grow and help them support this. And I have this here. I promise there's a point here that in the context of technology, right? So here we asked practitioners, DevOps practitioners, what it is that you are working on. Like, take these four technologies typically associated with cloud native: containers, Kubernetes, serverless function execution in this case, and service meshes. And where are you with your journey on adopting them? And you can see here, the point I want to make is, look how closely together all those numbers look like. Now, there's a famous statistician, George Box, who said the famous quote, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." And I think that's the case here. Don't get too hung up on the numbers, but look at how close those numbers are. And the way we interpret this is that there's an explosion in what teams are pursuing in terms of different technologies, different ways to do things. And the challenge for security is, of course, how do you help them secure it? So my question to each of you is, okay, you're seeing this evolution. What's next within your specific organizations in terms of securing cloud adoption?
Drew, let's start with you this time.
I think the first thing I want to say is with Fernando's slide on where people are in the journey. I would almost have another option in there. it's full involvement of all the teams, but it is a continual adoption thing. It's not 100% yet. And I'm not sure if I ever get to 100% because the technology continues to change. And as it changes, I have to adapt and adapt and change with it. I think the thing that I'm starting to see in my organization and other organizations, and I look back at my prior company for this as well, I think that companies are starting to say, I'm in the cloud now. I'm close to where I want to be. Do I want to consider that multi-cloud strategy? What additional workloads that may not be in the traditional IT space can I consider for the cloud? As I mentioned a little bit ago, some of the things that I'm working with my BizOps teams, we've created some internal serverless applications. That's in the cloud, and we're making sure that those are secure. So I think that that's the next thing is, going back to that democratization, some of the other teams that have siloed workloads, that we can start putting in the cloud as well, and helping them to evolve into that, rent versus buy scenario, I think is important.
Yeah. Sachin, what do you see from your point of view as next for your organization in terms of cloud adoption?
A couple of things, what I've been working on and where we see more traction is, one is the governance and then cloud economics. I think these two things a lot of people missed during the migration journey, and we also tend to work more on that side. And the another thing is what we just mentioned around the security on the multi-cloud, because the adoption of multi-cloud can happen when your security framework and policy can work consistently across clouds. Otherwise, you probably maybe have some functionality which you want to use from a specific cloud based on the use cases you have. But if the security becomes a barrier, then you probably are not able to leverage that functionality.
Yeah. So Dimitri, you've got a lot of projects on the back burner. What's next for you?
We're gonna try and do the meta approach here and try to build a CI/CD pipeline for security, learnings and teaching and mentorship into all the other pipelines that are happening. It's almost tactically irrelevant what exactly is going to be rolled out next quarter or next month, as long as it's generally strategically following the governance and policies and procedures that Sachin just mentioned. This is super important, but it will never end. To Drew's point, it will never end, and that's really the only pipeline that the security professionals have to concentrate on. Our pipeline of delivering our information and our stories to the rest of the engineering team and organization. Security on its own doesn't exist. It only exists in the context of what's being put out. And if those guys and girls understand it and become champions, then we're successful.
Yeah.
We win.
Amen. Avi, over and above what your fellow panelists have put out there, what would you add in terms of what you're hearing from clients is next for them in terms of cloud adoption?
So I think that essentially every customer that we see, whether he was born in the cloud or moving to the cloud, understand that he's starting new things in the cloud. The old on-prem environment is almost literally dead. And now the question is how you can allow the developer and development to utilize the cloud for what it is without limiting yourself. It's so easy to say, okay, move to the cloud, but I also migrated the old practices, the old limitation, the old way of doing things, and get something which is on-prem on the cloud. And then you get the drawbacks of both. So the question that we always see is we want to enjoy both worlds, both to be able to innovate, to run fast, not to be the company that tells our developers, you can't use that, you can't do that, you can't do that, but at the same time, maintain security and compliance.
Yeah, that we're hearing this recurring theme, don't be the department of no. Really great panel discussion. Fernando, I want to kind of bring the conversation back to you here. What was the biggest surprise you saw in doing the research for these reports?
I guess that since we do them periodically, it's something that's been evolving. But I'm optimistic, And the thing that surprised me the most is how well, and I think that the panelists showed this themselves, like it's great, how well they understand that this is not about the technology alone, right? I didn't show, I have gazillion data points to show, but one of them that came up the other day is that how it takes a seasoned executive for him or for her to help drive the organization, understand the culture change, the storytelling, the building the relationships, and having the foresight of deploying the technology to go along with it. So I guess that so I'm very optimistic about this, but I guess that the biggest surprise is how like I said, how well people understand that there's a lot more to this than just the technology alone. That's very heartening. Right.
Fernando, final question. Is there something from the panel discussion today that you learned that's new that might influence some of your next research projects?
Absolutely. I think that just seeing how far along people are in this journey, Drew, Dimitri, and Sachin and Avi, I think that seeing how well they understand these points already, I guess that it kind of drives, kind of like what Sachin was saying, what's next? Like, so how does governance play a bigger part into this? How does the economics play a bigger part into this? I have a deep interest in the economics of security, so I'll see what we can do in that sense.
Well, we're going to leave it right there. I want to thank each and every one of you on the panel today. Great conversation. In our next segment, we're going to hear a little bit more from the Orca security team. So I'll let my panelists disconnect with all of my greatest gratitude. Thank you so much. And Fernando as well. Thank you, sir. I'd like to bring on Patrick Pusher from Orca Security. Patrick is going to talk in more detail about some of the research, the primary research that Orca Security has done, and his experience working with clients, as well as a little bit more of an overview of the team there. Go ahead, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. And what a great discussion in terms of the brief and the panel. I know I learned a lot, and we'll try to tie kind of as many of those things we talked about into the kind of more Orca specific discussion here that we've got now. Maybe we'll start with the overview, and we'll wind in kind of maybe some customer stories in the journey and as we go and that sort of thing. So Orca is really fortunate to have, fintech, cloud, mid-market, and enterprise customers across North America, EMEA, and Asia Pac. Right, we're merely 2 years old, and so we're really proud of that. And one of the accomplishments we're most proud of is that how many Orca customers are willing to talk about, the solution. And on the record, we have more case studies on our website than a lot of IT security firms, kind of 10 times our size. And so we've made that a real priority. We definitely don't like developing the solution in a vacuum. So we're very, very, very close to our customers. Okay, so let's get started. When we think about what's been on the security menu up until now, it's really not that long of a list, right? So first, if we think about kind of how we determine workload level risks, software vulnerabilities, there's really sort of primarily been two ways. And the first is agents, right? Agents are installed and maintained as another application that runs alongside your important workload. And agents give you that visibility into what's running, some rogue activity on the host. They detect data that shouldn't exist, right? And more. The challenge with agents, as I'm sure you appreciate, is that you have to install them and maintain them, much like your trusted applications. And that's a challenge from a security perspective, right? When unsupervised workloads are a little bit like unsupervised children, we've drawn that analogy in the brief already, right? They find ways to get in trouble. And so every workload, every asset that doesn't get that agent deployed to it, and think about, as we talked about, cross-organization use of cloud, and the different ways governance happens, the different level of cloud maturity in each kind of business unit that might leverage the cloud organizationally. It's a real problem and a real challenge. So the next tactic or tool that we've used has been the network scanner. Right? Network scanners probe resources externally, looking for known configuration errors. And these two solutions really have been the cornerstone of data center security for many years. If you want to understand a physical machine security posture, for example, today, you're still necessarily using one or both of these technologies. In fact, we still use these today, right? Even in very modern public cloud environments where agents used to run on physical machines, they now run on virtual machines. Network scanners that used to be deployed into our physical networks are now deployed as virtual appliances. And so in about the last 5 or 6 years, we've added a third category of security applications since adopting the public cloud, and that is the CSPM, or Cloud Security Posture Manager. CSPMs monitor the cloud configuration itself, which networks and their attributes contain which resources, roles and permissions, password policies, that sort of thing. However, we really saw two main problems to this approach, right? And the first is that agent deployments don't scale well. And certainly as we think about public cloud adoption, kind of refactoring applications to be cloud native, this becomes a bigger and bigger challenge. And on average, we've seen that less than 50% of all cloud assets are covered by the security solution that an organization leverages, right? It's almost impossible to universally deploy agents. There's a lot of, and we talked about this, there's a lot of intra-organizational friction to get them deployed universally, even in organizations that have that sort of dedicated function to do so. And so we consistently see at Orca quite limited agent deployments in terms of public cloud environments. And then the second problem is that there are simply too many alerts, right? We've talked about this notion of alert fatigue, and especially as we heard about both in the brief and the panel, this, this skills gap shortage is still a very real thing, right? And so instead of inundating kind of those SOC or NOC operators who are responsible for watching those alerts with every single vulnerability, right? There needs to be a better way. And the main reason kind of for that inundation is that these tools work in their respective silos, right? They don't understand the overall picture and how security controls relate to one another. The agent-based approach sends all the alerts to the security operator and then puts the onus really on them to sort of add that context and work out truly what's important versus what can wait. So really, to address these shortcomings, Orca was founded on a patent-pending technology called side scanning, and it's really got several industry-unique benefits. Right? The first is that Orca provides complete coverage, no more per-asset integration. Your entire cloud estate is covered with one deployment. Second, it provides superior security, and you heard Avi say it. I'll absolutely back that up. Much better than we had in the local data center. It's a big claim, so let's talk a little bit about how that happens. So first, it's really important. Orca doesn't require or depend on any agents, any network scanners, any cloud security posture managers, and yet Orca detects those risks within your workloads, literally without sending a single packet over the network or running any ops code in your environment. And so instead of contributing to the problem and interfering with the cloud environment, we collect data directly from the workload's runtime block storage. In fact, this is sort of the first part of secret sauce to the Orca approach. And then we combine that intelligence with cloud metadata, right? Data like which security groups cover which workloads, how traffic is routed in virtual networks, and a lot more. And so instead of integrating with each and every workload requiring credentials, network access, installing agents, we read from that common shared virtualized environment. And that facilitates a real immediate understanding of all of the sort of major risks in your environment. So once you do get that cloud estate onboarded, again, with a sort of a one and done approach versus that per asset integration, Orca detects the risks that matter the most. Things like vulnerabilities in operating systems, in applications, packages, libraries, misconfigurations, machines that are already compromised, right? Those with neglected or orphaned workloads, as we already talked about. Machines that have flown under the radar and haven't been maintained for years. And that case is, that sort of workload that hasn't been maintained for a long time is especially troublesome because it's not that hard to detect if you can reach the machines, but those agents and scanner methods require that those machines are sort of reachable on the network. And we know we've got private networks with no route out to the internet, that we want to understand the risks on those as well, because of course, with that kind of notion of lateral movement, anything's possible. So let's talk about the side scanning benefits, right? The first is really, you get complete visibility. You see exactly what the host sees and the intelligence you get from Orca as at runtime, not just initial scan time. It's not a point in time kind of measurement. The second is that it's immediately attached, right? New hosts are automatically scanned, no organizational friction. We talked about how challenging it can be for kind of a central GRC team to have a perspective across all the different ways the cloud is leveraged across an organization. And so having something that kind of sees all and doesn't require that per asset integration is really, really strategic. No impact, right? Because Orca reads those disk images from the side, nothing exists in your workload. Those scans happen out of band, and we don't compete with our customers' need for CPU and disk and memory. The Orca approach, is completely VPC agnostic. We don't require host credentials, which is really unique for kind of a vulnerability identification and management solution. If perhaps you acquire an environment or you acquire an initiative from a business unit, you don't need to know exactly how, the credentials to every workload. Orca scans it at the disk level. And then last, it's tamper-proof. Again, because there's nothing running in your code, no malware can look for an Orca presence. There will be nothing there. Even for concepts like a rootkit, Orca can absolutely identify those, where others really have challenges. Okay, so we talked about side scanning. It's certainly the first pillar of Orca. The second is this notion of context, right? We've talked about how Orca understands data at the host via this very powerful kind of side scanning approach, but that same process also analyzes the host configuration, right? And Orca builds what we call a context map by mashing up all of this deep workload discovery detail combined with those measurements we've taken at the cloud context. And Orca will discover those cloud assets. And in fact, Orca exposes that information in the inventory interface of the service, which I'll show you if we have time. Then identify asset roles, which resources are configured to do what permissions do they have, identify the connectivity between resources, which networks are public facing versus those that aren't, which networks have the conventions to allow incoming traffic versus those that don't, that kind of thing. And then and only then, Orca identifies risks with that full, rich contextual awareness. So let's work through a quick example, then we'll take a quick look at the product, and then we'll get back for hopefully some Q&A time. So in this example, let's say server 1 and server 2, two workloads, both running a web server that have a vulnerable library, vulnerable to remote code execution risk in this case. And for the sake of this example, assume that the vulnerability is the very same one between server 1 and server 2, right? So a contextless vulnerability scanner, like an agent, would simply report this vulnerability with its static CVSS score, and both workloads would end up with the same score. After all, they are the very same vulnerability. Orca, on the other hand, sort of deduces from the cloud configuration that the service on server 1 is internet facing, and therefore that risk is sort of imminent compromise. Server 2 is not internet facing and cannot be reached directly from really anywhere except a particular host. And so the risk level there is downgraded to medium or hazardous, right? And that's that power of context. It's not that either is not important, but what am I going to do necessarily with vulnerabilities that are on isolated workloads? How about vulnerabilities that don't have a fix, right? It's not necessarily information I don't want, but I don't want that to precede something that I can actually do something about. So in the end, we really believe context is absolutely mandatory in any security strategy. Over thousands and thousands of alerts, which are those that if you don't address will likely lead to compromise down the road, which require action now versus those that are, truly sort of informational. So you really do get better and more effective prioritization, right? Orca takes into account the surroundings of workloads to determine what's critical. Because Orca has full visibility into sort of your whole cloud estate, it compares resources that should look the same but don't, like cluster members, for example. And a difference like that can be really indicative of something, going wrong, something malicious, something that needs further investigation. And then lastly, misplaced data or configuration, right? When Orca finds keys in a workload, for example, SSH keys, AWS user keys, or others, because we understand the full context of sort of the cloud efforts, we can map those keys to your environment and show you exactly not just that they're there, but what they provide access to. And that's truly the power of context. Okay, let's shift quick. We're going to shorten the demo a little bit. I know we're just a little bit behind on time, but let's take a look at Orca. So one of the first things we talk about is just how easy it is to deploy Orca, right? If you're coming from any other way, as we talked about in our session, of managing kind of host-based vulnerabilities, you are integrating per asset and per network, right? And that's very, very different. Here, you're connecting Orca to your AWS or your Azure or your GCP account or project, And from that point on, and it's a very, very trivial, quick process. And from that point on, Orca sees everything that you spin up. It sees the changes in your existing workloads, no more per asset integration. And that is absolutely huge, right? Orca customers attach all of their cloud accounts to their single Orca account, and then they govern with consistency across them. That's kind of the strategy. So, if you've done this, it takes you probably 90 seconds to onboard an account, which is, trivial, especially compared to any other way of sort of managing host-based vulnerabilities. And once you do, Orca begins to side scan. It begins to ask that cloud provider about all that metadata for that rich context. And then we'll raise kind of the top 5 alerts in each category here on the dashboard, right? Vulnerabilities, malware vulnerabilities, and you'll notice the color-coded risk score under each alert. Neglected assets, those that haven't been patched, those that have fallen out of support from a vendor perspective, right? Which is a slightly different kind of risk profile. Outdated resources, and you'll notice these are a mix of kind of host-based observations and cloud control plane observations, because to build that context, obviously Orca knows a lot about kind of that cloud configuration. And so we'll raise, alerts that have to do with workloads having too much permission, for example, indications of lateral movement. We talked about, if Orca finds SSH keys in a workload, it doesn't just tell you that it found the keys, but it'll actually tell you which systems they map to. Because, of course, at the same time it scanned this workload, Orca has scanned everything else in your cloud estate. So now I know, hey, if somebody with bad intent had landed here and sort of scooped up this SSH key, now I've got 4 other machines I have to go and make sure I check for any kind of indication of compromise, which of course Orca has already done in the background. We talked a little bit about kind of the inventory-centric interface. Orca customers use this, this is a very security-centric, obviously, inventory interface, but they use this, again, as you attach all of your cloud accounts to Orca, you get this great way to kind of look above, and we talked about how common multi-cloud strategies are becoming. We have a great way to sort of look above each independent cloud provider and do a great security audit of kind of where you are. I consider this kind of security situational awareness, if you will. And I know we have to wrap. This will be the last screen we talk about. Orca also sort of allows you to get not just active alerts around what's going on in your environment, but also from a compliance perspective, how I'm doing down at that operating system host level, but also how I'm doing against really a number of different standards at the cloud control level, right? So we have some AWS Center for Internet Security tests. These are, again, tests like a CSPM might do, kind of around, open security groups, permissive IAM policies, and then also have compliance standards for down, at that workload level, operating CIS. And these are down sort of judging the workload configuration for best practices and that sort of thing. So a super crash course on Orca for sure, but hopefully that gives you a sense of, how industry unique Orca is in terms of managing workload risk and how powerful that sort of context, alert aggregation and context truly is to taking the burden off the shoulders of those responding to alerts, right, and doing some of that heavy lifting for them. As we mentioned kind of in the introduction, Orca has released really 2 really interesting pieces of research in about the last 6 months. The first, this one, the state of virtual appliance security, quite recently. And this is where Orca applied our sort of side scanning technique to really all of the publicly available sort of marketplace images across a cloud provider and talked about the risks inherent in them, right? We assume when we use an off-the-shelf operating system or application image that it's free from defects and is kind of regularly addressed. But as we found, even with security companies, that isn't always necessarily the case. So really, really interesting. And then just a few months before that, we did some aggregation of our customers' information and statistics and released another report just around, how we're doing around the adherence to that sort of shared responsibility model, how we're doing leveraging the controls we have, both at the host and the cloud control plane kind of level, and some really interesting findings there as well. And that's it.
Wow, that was great information. So we had some questions come in, Patrick. The first question was actually from the last session. How do you deal with sort of multi-cloud environments? So I've got some Azure, I've got some Google, I've got some AWS. Can I side scan through all the environments at the same time?
It's a good question. You absolutely can. So that technology applies equally well to workloads in AWS, in Azure, and GCP. And yeah, as we talked about with that multi-cloud strategy, right? We knew that would be important. A lot of our customers start off leveraging the native tools, but then as they get into multi-cloud scenarios, kind of the differences between those tools, those gaps widen. And so they like the fact that Orca can kind of do that consistently across providers for sure.
Could you give us an idea without specifics, just on the sort of draw lines around what the pricing model is for Orca?
Yeah, it's we look at your cloud accounts, we look at the number of resources in them. That's the model. So someone just starting out with a handful of sort of resources, obviously, we try to conform to that utility pricing model. We know that's the big reason a lot of our customers were drawn to the cloud in the first place. So we support that absolutely. And it's it's in the realm of what you pay for sort of traditional vulnerability management, obviously with quite a bit more functionality.
Now, along the lines of that multi-cloud question, this other question that came in from Robert was about if I move from cloud providers, does my security data come with me?
No.
Okay, so you lose the access to those sorts of things. Now, but in that context, when I want to be free from relying on one provider, what kind of advice do you give to clients when you're talking to them about those requests?
Yeah, that lock-in, it's a balance, right? If your goal is to leverage one provider but not necessarily exclude another in the future, right? You're going to go only so deep in those proprietary kind of functions that they have, right? And I think that's the challenge. We get asked that all the time and that's part of the problem with native tool support. If you're in one cloud environment, you typically tend to go deep, and as you refactor your applications, you're leveraging more and more of those cloud native functions. But then as you sort of pull that and say, I want to do the same thing in GCP as I'm doing in AWS, for example, some of that functionality doesn't exist depending on what we're talking about, right? So for those with really multi-cloud strategies today or in mind, we find them using the features at a more shallow depth, which is a little bit too bad because you don't get that same functionality for sure.
Now, same question for Orca. For Orca Security, if I have users that are sort of not rocket scientists in the native tools, how hard is it for them to pick up the Orca interface?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that's the power of, and the whole reason we brought such a focus on context to Orca, right? Because what we heard about the native tools is they're great. A lot of our customers use us in tandem, right? But the challenge they have is that sometimes you have to piece together the findings of those native tools to make kind of a conscious stream of what actually happened, right? And so that's what Orca tries to do is, look at the logging coming out of the platform, look at the configuration by asking the platforms lots of questions, and then piece that together so that your already likely strapped team from a resource perspective doesn't have to do all of that by themselves.
Yeah, and does that usually usually resourced out of the SOC, the Security Operations Center, or another group within the organization? What do you see?
Yeah, it normally is. I think there's this sort of panacea that one day we'll get to this point where we'll auto remediate a lot of these findings, right? Take some of the responsibility away from those SOC or NOC operators, not the responsibility, but maybe the headache. We're getting there, but I think obviously to do that, we have to be really, really confident in the findings of our tools, right? There's not a lot of tolerance for, false positives as we think about auto remediating the findings. So yeah, today it's the SOC or NOC. What happens in the future around automation, we'll see.
All right, great. We're going to leave it right there. Lots of information available for the team. They can, everyone who attended will get a copy of both of those white papers you referenced, as well as some information on the slides. And the Orca security team will follow up with you to be able to show you a more personalized demo to give you a little more context for the quick one that Patrick gave you. Patrick, thanks you so much for your time and attention today and for going through the details. I know our audience liked it, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye now.